Hello again, fellow podcaster, and welcome back to Podcast Theory Live. I am your host, Jason Sircone. It is Wednesday, June 26th, 2024, and today it's part 3 of my 5-part series sharing some of the wild and crazy stories and experiences that I've had in my almost 10 years in the podcasting space. So if you've missed the first 2 live streams of the week, the reason I decided to do it this week is because I am going to be in Charlotte, North Carolina for the Empowered Podcasting Conference, the very first Empowered Podcasting Conference, June 28th through June 30th. If you haven't gotten your ticket yet, what are you waiting for? Jump over to empoweredpodcasting.com. See what this concert is going to be. I did it again. See what this conference is going to be all about. Grab your ticket. I'd love to meet you in person, but I know I'm going to be having some fun while I'm there because I'm going to be on the stage. I'm going to be leading a panel discussion about how podcasting has become a better version of social media. I'm also going to be emceeing the event, or one of the MCs of the event. So I know I'm going to be having fun with the people in the house. I thought this was a good week to have some fun with you in the Bomb Squad, taking in these live streams of Podcast Theory Live. And I'd like to take this trip down memory lane with somebody else, and that is you. I'm glad you're here enjoying this, whether it's in video format via the live stream or checking out the replay in audio format. It's fun to relive some of these stories. And the first 2 that I shared were from my very first podcast, as is today's. So this was, I'm trying to think of the time. This story is a 2-parter. And what I learned from this, the lesson that I'll be getting to, is that listener experience is everything. And these 2 experiences are what really drove that point home for me. I really wish that the point would have been driven home after the first experience, but I digress. Sometimes it takes us a little longer to learn these important lessons. So, picture it, 2016, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. There is a great beer festival coming up featuring barrel-aged beer, which is one of my favorite style. I don't want to call it a beer style, but basically what brewers do is they age their beer in a whiskey barrel and rum barrels and all these different barrels that were once used to age whiskey, age rum, age whatever the spirit was. A lot of those flavor components, a lot of those notes, they end up getting into the beer, and it makes for an absolutely awesome drinking experience. And one of the breweries and one of the whiskey companies here in Pittsburgh decided that they should have a festival that spoke very strongly to that fact. God bless them for it. I knew I was going to be going regardless, whether I was just going to hang out or be there for my podcast, my blog, whatever the case may be. I decided to ask, would it be cool if we do a live podcast from the event? And by live, not like this, live streaming, but we'll record it live and then I'll edit and put it out to the world to consume the next day. They love the idea. They said, absolutely, bring your setup, we'll give you a little space. We can send people over to talk with you. It'll be a great time. It'll be a great little feature to have at the event. So we were stoked. We started talking to some friends. Hey, we're going to be doing this. Make sure you come and talk to us. It's going to be a great time. So we set up, and little did I realize that after we set up, we would be enjoying the event for about an hour, a little over an hour before recording the podcast. And in that hour-ish and change time frame, boy, did we get a little toasty. Then we sit down to start recording, and I've got one of the girls from the whiskey company, and she says, oh, wait, before you hit record, you have to do this. And she put 3 shots of whiskey in front of me. Now, me being young and dumb and not realizing that this would probably screw me up and kill my hosting credibility to some degree, I did all 3 shots, much like it was like my 21st birthday. This is after having drank for a while. Hit record, and now we're off and running, and I didn't even announce my name right when I started. I said my colleague, my co-host, Jason Collins, I announced myself as him to set the table for what was about to unfold. So I will spare you the rest, but it ended up being about an hour and a half of just an absolute debacle. And the reason being is that, for one, we had been drinking and it was a beer podcast. So I think in a lot of ways we were given a pass in that respect. But from a pure production standpoint, getting the opportunity to sit and talk with everybody, it was a blast. I felt like the conversations were very good, very engrossing. I did as well as I could in the situation, or in the just the overall shape that I was in. But from a listener's experience, when I went back to edit that podcast the next day, oh, what a shit show. There was 2 or 3 different conversations taking place at the same time. You've got all of this background noise from the event, and I was able to remove some of it in post-production, but for the most part, it's still there. And overall, it just didn't make for a good listener experience. But in my mind at that time, I felt, because they knew it's a beer podcast, they know we're on location at this event, we're going to be okay. So I put that episode out. I can't say that it did good, bad, or ugly based off of what it was in regards to the final product. I can say that as myself, if I had come across something like that, especially if I came across something like that today, I would have been out in the first minute, because that clearly wasn't speaking to the power of the listener experience. So like I said, wish I would have learned my lesson from that first recording, but I didn't. So fast forward to the end of the podcast, when I was winding things down. I had announced that I was closing the show down, but we were going to do 5 more episodes, and I had lined up for the audience exactly what to expect. This episode was this one. The next one was this, right on down to the grand finale, wrapping up the show. So I didn't want to pull back on something that I had advertised, but in reality, I probably should have, because what ended up happening was we got together in a friend's garage, and they brewed beer in this garage, and they used to invite people over while they were brewing. And we decided, let's do a podcast. And we ended up with not 3 people on the microphone, not 4, not 5, 12 people on the microphone. And there were 4 microphones, so 3 people per microphone. And it was just an absolute nightmare. There was a point where I left and went to the bathroom, and while I was gone, somebody took a fart gun and held it up to the microphone and just let it rip for a good minute. Just an absolute, just complete tomfoolery and poppycock when it was all said and done. Now, a lot of it, unbeknownst to me, it was even getting that I know that it was getting captured, because I didn't realize this till the next day when I went back to edit, and just shook my head saying, oh God. I remember the one thing I said to myself was, thank God this show is coming to an end, because I had felt at that point I had gotten beyond some of the nonsense that had happened in that episode. But it was also very humbling to make me realize that maybe you haven't, man. And maybe your next production needs to speak more to the professional side of things, which was the direction I ended up taking it. And I made sure going forward that I maintained much more control over everything that I was producing. The moral of the story, as I said, listener experience is everything. When you're creating a podcast, you've got to put your listeners' consumption habits, and you've got to think of that whole psychology piece when you're putting your content together. What's going to make your listener truly engage with your podcast? What's going to keep them invested from the time they press play till they reach the very end of the show? That's the most important metric to gauge. Don't get hung up on download metrics. Look at your consumption rates, because if you're doing a very long hour and a half, 2-hour podcast, but then discovering that the average listener is dropping off after 30 to 40 minutes, that should tell you something. That should tell you that you need to tighten up that content and give them what they're looking for. That's going to keep them invested from start to finish, so they get the entire message. Plus, shortening something up like that is going to make things easier for you on the production side of things. Now, again, this is one of many things to look at, but overall, the point that I'm driving at is you have to think about your listener and what they are experiencing when they listen to your podcast. We have come a long way since all that nonsense that I just explained back in 2016. So you add 8 years to this adventure that I've been on. clearly I've learned a lot more in regards to what I'm doing in production and what I'm bringing to you in the audience. But when you are producing content for your audience, big or small, you have to think about that factor of what are they experiencing when they consume this product, either in video format or in audio format. You want to make sure that what they walk away with is something that made them feel good, made them appreciate the time they spent consuming, and makes them want to come back for more. If the listener experience is poor and it's not something that's focused on right out of the gates, that first impression is huge. And if it's bad, it's lost. And they will find another podcast because guess what? There are other podcasts out there they can consume. You are fighting for your listeners' attention. And the only way you're going to capture that is if you think of their experience first. If you ignore it, you are going to miss out on a lot of opportunities, and your ability to grow is going to be incredibly stifled. So take a lesson from those two just absolutely ridiculous stories that I told from back in the early days of my podcasting career. Don't let the nonsense of what you're doing in the moment spill into what you're producing for your audience, because even if it's fun in the moment, it might not be fun for your listener to consume, and therefore they may fall off and never come back. That's the last thing you want when you're looking to grow your podcast. That is going to wrap up installment number 3 in this 5-part series of crazy and wild stories and lessons that I've gained from those stories of my time in the podcasting space. I hope you're enjoying this week of story time with me. As I said, this is all building up to the Empowered Podcasting Conference taking place June 28th through 30th in Charlotte, North Carolina. Grab your tickets. It's going to be last second at this point, but I'd love to see you there if you can still make it. If you're in the Charlotte area, it would be great to see you in the house. EmpoweredPodcasting.com has all the information that you need, and I will be back tomorrow with part 4 in this 5-part series of wild and crazy stories that have happened to me in my time in the podcasting space. Until we meet again tomorrow, this has been Jason Cercone on Podcast Theory Live. Good talk. I will see you out there.